A single rusted wire stretched between two leaning wooden poles at the edge of a fallow field. Once part of an old telegraph line, it hadn't carried signal or current in years. Now it cut across the horizon like a forgotten thought, tight in some places, sagging in others, buzzing faintly, only when the wind remembered to pass through. And then, one morning, the raven landed. It arrived without sound. No wing beat, no call. Just the soft, precise grip of black claws wrapping around the wire. Its feathers were ink dark, slightly ruffled from the cold. The bird didn't move. It didn't caw, didn't shift its weight. It only stared, forward, unblinking, into the distance beyond the hills, where fog was beginning to lift. Below, the grass should have moved. The whole field, dry and thin, was usually restless. But now it was flat, still, as if the raven's presence had pressed some invisible hand against the world's breath. The wire, which once thrummed with the hum of air, had gone silent. Farm dogs in the distance paused mid-bark. A windmill 2 fields away spun a few more lazy circles, then creaked to a halt. Even the flies, common, constant, had disappeared from the fence posts. The raven blinked once. The sun moved, but the sky did not. Clouds held their shapes longer than they should have. Their undersides glowed silver, and their edges stayed unnaturally sharp. A passing airplane crossed high overhead, but its vapor trail didn't stretch. It didn't smear. It lingered in place like a scar etched into glass. For nearly an hour, the raven sat. To those watching, not that there were many, it appeared ordinary. Just a bird on a wire. But something was different now, even if they couldn't name it. A pressure, a pause, as though the earth had taken a breath and wasn't sure it wanted to let it go. And then, just as quietly, the raven spread its wings and left the wire. Its shadow passed once across the dry earth. The breeze returned. The clouds softened. The windmill resumed its slow, lazy turn. And somewhere in the grass, a cricket chirped like it had just woken up. The wire vibrated slightly, then fell still again. But something had shifted. The field remembered. And far above, so did the sky. The next morning, the sky did not rise the same. It was clear, but wrong. The color too even. The clouds too reluctant to form. A blue so flat it felt painted, not stretched. As though the dome above had stopped being atmosphere and started being memory, and the birds noticed. It began with the swallows. Usually fast, frenetic, swooping low over the old field in arcs that bent with wind and whim. But today they moved in tight circles, not in hunger but hesitation. Their bodies twitched toward instinct, yet something unseen pulled them back. They rose higher than usual and looked down, not forward. Later came the gulls, blown inland by a coastal shift, loud, restless, but quiet when they passed the wire. One by one they grew silent, coasting overhead, their wings stiffened not by fatigue, but uncertainty, as if they too were scanning the earth for something that should have moved, and hadn't. Then the hawk came, a red-shouldered hunter, known to the area, who had claimed a series of fence posts near the far tree line. For years it had kept to a wide range, following rabbits and mice through the brush. But that day it hovered in place, wings spread, suspended above the field, just above the wire. It didn't dive. It didn't call. It only watched. From time to time, it turned its head toward the poles, then the ground, then the empty span of wire between them. Its feathers bristled in a wind that wasn't blowing. And then, for a few long minutes, it folded its wings mid-air and allowed itself to fall. Not as a hunt, not as a dive, just a fall. It pulled out just above the earth, shook itself, and left westward, not returning that day or the one after. People who noticed said little. A farmer paused his truck and watched the sky. A woman hanging laundry held a pin in her mouth longer than she should have. Children stopped their bikes at the crest of the hill and looked up at birds that didn't flap. In town, a retired lineman, once responsible for maintaining the poles, stood at the edge of the field with binoculars. He made no comment, only lowered the lenses, and wrote a single sentence into a small weather-stained notebook. Birds don't watch wire. And still the raven did not return, but the wire waited, and this time it was not alone. 3 days after the raven, the clouds returned, but they didn't move. They gathered in shapes that should have dissolved with wind, but instead stayed suspended, dense, low, and gray, like ash that refused to fall. They covered the horizon in a quilt of uneven silence, not storm clouds, not fog, something in between, and with them came the sound. No one heard it at first. It didn't register in the ears. It lived behind the bones, just at the edge of comprehension. A static pressure, a hum without tone. Children complained of earaches. Dogs barked at corners of empty rooms. Radios hissed, even when unplugged. Old televisions flicked on for brief seconds in garages and basements, showing snow with no source. And over the field, the wire buzzed again, but not with wind. The sound wasn't vibration, it was presence. A low-level broadcast from somewhere above, as if the clouds themselves were holding onto an old signal that had nowhere left to go. There were no stations nearby, no transmitters. The poles had long been dead. Still, the noise built. A local man flew a drone over the field to capture footage. The drone lost GPS signal midair, veered hard left, then dropped, not into the ground, but onto the wire, as if pulled. The footage, though corrupted, showed a single clean frame, the wire seen from above, and something perched on it. Not a bird, not anything familiar, just form, with mass, with edges too blurred to name. But the raven had not returned. At night the clouds glowed faintly, not lightning, not moonlight, a soft internal luminescence like backlit paper. Occasionally a flicker moved through the sky, sideways, not down, like a current chasing something it couldn't reach. People stopped sleeping well. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the feeling of something not quite begun. The lineman returned, stood under the poles. This time he brought his old analog voltmeter. It twitched, just once. And he wrote another line in his notebook. Wire hot, no power. Still, the birds avoided it. Still, the wire held still. And somewhere between static and cloud, something had started listening back. It began with a shift in leaves. On the fourth morning after the raven, the trees along the far end of the field stirred, not from above, but from below, as if their roots had flinched. Then the trembling moved upward, reversing the natural rhythm. Branches shook last, not first. The grass followed suit. Instead of swaying in waves across the landscape, it bent inwards, toward the center of the field, toward the wire. Not strongly, not enough to raise alarm, but in a pattern too unified for coincidence, like a breath being drawn. The wind had turned around, no longer coming from the hills as it always had. It now moved toward them, funneled by some unseen pressure. Even smoke from a nearby chimney coiled backward, unnaturally horizontal, before disappearing midair. The sky didn't change color. The clouds didn't break. But birds returned. First one, not the raven, but a starling. It landed on the lower rung of one of the leaning poles. Then two more. They didn't sing. They didn't shift. They only sat and watched. At 9:42 a.m., as recorded by the town's weather station, the wind officially ceased. Not dropped, ceased. The air became solid, heavy, like glass pressing inward from all directions. It became difficult to breathe outdoors, not from pollution, not from temperature, but from a wrongness in the density of the air. And then the raven returned. Without sound, it reappeared on the wire as if it had never left. Same perch, same posture. It faced the hills again, eyes sharp and unblinking. The birds on the poles stilled further. One by one, they closed their wings against their sides, not in comfort, but in tension, like soldiers awaiting an order. The lineman was already at the edge of the field. He hadn't slept. His hands trembled slightly as he held his notebook. He watched the raven. He listened. and as the wind moved past him, not around him, he felt it drag something behind his ears, like the suction of a receding tide. He didn't write this time. He just stood there, mouth open slightly, as if to say something he hadn't yet found the words for. And above it all, the clouds grew sharper again, not darker, not thicker, just defined like etched shapes. The field was no longer forgotten. It was waiting. It didn't fall. It didn't move. It didn't even cast a shadow. But one morning it was there, high above the field, motionless against the sky, barely visible but undeniably present. Not a craft, not a cloud, not even a hole. It was the absence of sky, a bruise where color should be, a spot where the blue bent wrong, where your eyes couldn't focus, and the longer you looked, the more certain you became that something had gone missing. Not from above, but from yourself. People noticed, not at first, not with words, but traffic near the old road beside the field began to thin. Walkers took new paths. One child threw a ball too far and refused to chase it. A dog tugged at its leash until its owner turned around. By noon, birds had stopped looking up. Even the raven. It remained on the wire, still unmoving, but now with its head slightly turned downward, as if something overhead had made the very act of looking unnatural. The other birds along the poles were silent, their bodies tight with strain, feathers pressed flat. The lineman returned again. He brought binoculars this time, and a notebook. But he didn't raise either. He stepped to the edge of the field, looked up once, and then dropped his gaze quickly. He did write that day, just one line. There is something that resists observation. Later, he taped the notebook shut. That evening, a thunderstorm was forecast, but no clouds moved. No lightning came. Just distant rumbles, muffled and vague, like they came from behind a wall of water no one could see. And still the shape remained. Not changing, not growing, just waiting. The wire didn't vibrate. The air didn't stir. And still, the world beneath the shape felt narrower, as if pressure pressed down only in that one place. At night, the shape faded from view, but not because it vanished, because the stars refused to shine where it had been. It began as a return, a background hum like before. But this time, it did not come from the sky. It came from everything else. The wires hummed again, but not only the old wire between the poles. So did metal fences, window frames, the coils of electric stovetops, even when cold. It ran underfoot in the copper of forgotten irrigation systems, through rusting nails in barn walls, through the earth itself, a slow, vibrational ache. People felt it first in their mirrors. Reflections paused slightly behind movement. Not fully delayed, just hesitant. A blink that lingered. A hand that followed half a second behind the real one. Someone in town covered all the mirrors in their home with black cloth. Others noticed their drinking glasses trembling slightly on the shelf. And the raven moved. For the first time since it had returned, it shifted. Not wings, not claws. Its head, it looked up. Not for long, no more than a second or two. But the movement was enough to change the entire balance of the field. The other birds twitched but did not flee. The wind stopped again. Somewhere in the nearby trees, a crow let out a low, drawn-out call that ended too soon, like a breath cut off. The sky had not changed. The shape was still there, colorless, motionless. But now, things on the ground began to act like it had weight. The lineman, who had not returned in 2 days, was seen walking the tree line before dawn, barefoot and carrying his old radio. Though no one had seen it work in years, it clicked faintly, rhythmically, even without batteries. He whispered something to the trees, then turned around and left, and the static grew louder. It wasn't sound, not truly. It was resonance, an intrusion. Dogs barked at floors instead of doors. Cattle near the far edge of the field broke through a fence and refused to return. A television in a locked equipment shed turned on in the middle of the night and displayed only a blank screen. No white snow, just gray, as if it were listening. And still, the raven held the wire. The shape above no longer seemed content to simply exist. It had begun to pull, not down, not toward, but inward, like a drain at the center of stillness. Everything pointed toward the next moment, but the moment never came. The last morning was still, not just quiet, still in a way that reached under the skin. No birds, no wind, no insects. Even the sun rose reluctantly, dragging pale light across a colorless field. The shape in the sky was gone, not vanished. Gone, as if it had never existed. The sky filled in where it had been, but the space felt artificial, like a scar covered with paint. The clouds moved again, but their motion was unsure, as though they didn't remember how. And the raven was no longer on the wire. Neither were the starlings, nor the gulls, nor the hawk. The poles remained, leaning cracked but upright, and the wire between them, old, rusted, forgotten, now hummed faintly with a tension it had not known in decades. It was no longer slack. It was tight, as if something had pulled at it from both ends with purpose. The sound it made wasn't from wind or electricity. It was memory, a low metallic vibration, the kind a system makes when it holds on to something long after it's been turned off. The lineman's notebook was found in the grass. Its last page was torn, but one sentence remained. Whatever it was, it left through us. In town, no one spoke of the field anymore. The road nearby became overgrown. Children stopped asking about the raven. The farmer who once worked the edge of the property sold the land and left the region. He said nothing in the paperwork. Occasionally, birds passed overhead. Sparrows, finches, swallows. But they never landed. Not on the poles, not on the wire, not even in the surrounding trees. And yet, every so often, a distant rumble could still be heard. Not thunder, not engines. Something slower, lower, like a loop trying to close. The wire held steady. It no longer needed watchers, because it remembered what the sky had forgotten.